I never meant to look. That's the thing nobody talks about when a secret gets discovered. Nobody goes looking for something that completely destroys them. You stumble, you trip over it in the dark, and then the lights come on, and you're standing in the middle of a room you don't recognize, in a house you thought was yours. That's what happened to me. It was a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a thunderstorm Tuesday or a something feels wrong Tuesday. Just a plain, ordinary, slightly boring Tuesday in October, when the leaves were turning outside my kitchen window, and I had a pot of vegetable soup on the stove, and my husband's phone was sitting on the counter because he'd left it there when he ran out to grab milk. That's it. That's how it started. His phone lit up. I wasn't trying to read it. I was stirring the soup, but I glanced over the way you glance at anything that lights up near you. It's just reflex, and I saw the preview of a text message on his screen. Just the first line, just enough. She asked about you again. What do I tell her? I stood there with a wooden spoon in my hand and the steam rising off the soup, and I told myself it was nothing. A work thing. A friend. His sister, maybe, talking about some family drama. I told myself 100 different stories in about 4 seconds flat, because the human mind is extraordinary at protecting itself from things it isn't ready to know. I put the spoon down. I looked at that phone, and I picked it up. Let me tell you who I was before that Tuesday. My name is Claire. I'm 43 years old, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I'm a middle school science teacher. I like hiking on weekends. I make my own bread. I can name every constellation visible from the northern hemisphere. And for 17 years I genuinely believed I was one half of a solid, real, honest marriage. His name is Daniel. Dan. We met when I was 24 and he was 27 at a friend's backyard barbecue in the summer. He was funny. Not performatively funny. Not the kind of guy who's always working the room, but quietly funny. The kind who says something dry and understated and makes you laugh when you weren't expecting to. He had dark hair going slightly gray at the temples even then, and these green eyes that went warm when he smiled, and he listened when you talked. Really listened. Not waiting for his turn to speak, actually listening. I fell in love with him slowly and then all at once, the way it happens when it's real. We got married when I was 26. Small wedding. My parents' backyard. My sister did my hair. We wrote our own vows, nothing fancy, just honest. And I remember thinking, standing there in that simple white dress, that I had never felt more certain about anything in my life. We bought a house in a suburb of Columbus 8 years ago. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a big oak tree, a kitchen with a slightly crooked cabinet door that Dan always said he'd fix and never did. We talked about kids for years, wanted them, tried for them, lost 2 pregnancies early on, grieved together, and eventually made a quiet peace with it just being the 2 of us. We built a life. A real, layered, complicated, beautiful life. Dinner parties with friends, camping trips every summer. 17 years of Christmases and arguments about the thermostat, and lazy Sunday mornings, reading in bed. I thought I knew him, down to the bone, down to the silences between sentences. I did not know him at all. Looking back, and I've spent a tremendous amount of time looking back, there were signs. Of course there were. There always are. The problem is that when you love someone and you trust them, and your life with them feels fundamentally solid, your brain files those signs under something else. Under stress, under personality quirks, under just a phase, under I'm probably imagining things. The first thing I can point to now was about 2.5 years ago. Dan works in project management for a mid-sized logistics company. He travels occasionally for work, not constantly, maybe once every 6 or 8 weeks, a few days at a time. He'd always been good about staying in touch when he traveled, texting throughout the day, calling at night. It was one of those small things I appreciated about him. He checked in. He was present even when he wasn't there. But 2.5 years ago, he went to Charlotte for a 3-day conference, and something was just slightly off. He still texted. He still called. But the calls felt shorter, more distracted, like part of him was somewhere else even while he was talking to me. I mentioned it when he got home, lightly, not accusatorially, just said he'd seemed a little distant, and he said he was stressed about a presentation. Work stuff. He pulled me in and hugged me in that solid, familiar way of his, and I let it go. Then there was the gym thing. Dan had never been a gym person. We both exercised, hiking, cycling, that kind of thing, but he'd never been someone who did a regular gym routine. About 18 months ago, he announced he was joining a gym near his office, said he wanted to get back in shape, start lifting again. I thought it was great. I was genuinely supportive. He started going 3, sometimes 4 mornings a week, leaving the house by 6:15. He did get in shape. He lost maybe 15 pounds, gained visible muscle in his shoulders and arms. I told him he looked great. He smiled and said he felt great. I didn't think twice about it. The phone, his personal phone, started going on silent more and more. He said it helped him focus at work. Less distraction. I bought it completely. I am a person who puts my own phone on Do Not Disturb constantly. It seemed reasonable. There was one night maybe 8 months ago when I woke up at 2 in the morning and his side of the bed was empty. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table in the dark, looking at his phone. When I came in, he closed the screen immediately, quick, reflexive, and said he couldn't sleep and was reading. I asked what he was reading. He said the news. He came back to bed. I lay there in the dark for a while, that closed screen moment replaying in my mind, and I told myself, he's allowed to have privacy. He's not doing anything wrong. I trust this man. I went back to sleep. The phone in my hand on that Tuesday felt heavier than it should have. The text preview that had caught my eye was from a contact saved simply as M, not a name, just a letter. The phone was locked, but I knew his passcode. I'd always known it. He'd never hidden it from me, had given it to me years ago when I'd needed to look something up on his phone during a road trip and my own battery was dead. He'd never changed it. At least I didn't think he had. I typed in the 6 digits. The phone opened. I want to describe what happened in those next few minutes carefully because it's important to get it right. It wasn't like in the movies where the betrayed spouse finds something and immediately starts screaming or throwing things. It was much quieter than that, much slower. It was like being submerged in cold water, a gradual, total submersion where the world above the surface goes blurry and muffled, and you're just suspended there, not quite processing what you're seeing. I opened the messages from M. There were hundreds of them, months and months of messages. I scrolled up, way up, and the thread went back nearly 3 years. 3 years of daily texts, good morning texts, good night texts, texts that said miss you and thinking about you and can't wait to see you. Texts from her saying things like, like she drew a picture of you today and she keeps asking when you're coming back. She, a child. I stopped scrolling. I stood very still in my kitchen, next to the soup that was gently bubbling on the stove, and I read that sentence 3 more times. She drew a picture of you today. My husband had a child. There is a specific kind of pain that doesn't feel like pain at first. It feels like nothing, like a sudden absolute numbness that moves from the center of your chest outward until it reaches your hands and feet and the top of your head. It's the body's emergency response to information too large to process all at once. The mind just goes quiet, shuts the unnecessary systems down. I turned the burner off on the soup. I sat down at the kitchen table. I kept reading. Her name was Michelle. That's what I eventually pieced together from the messages. The woman's name was Michelle, and she and Dan had apparently been together in some capacity for nearly 3 years. She lived in Charlotte, where he'd gone for that first conference 2.5 years ago when the calls home felt distracted and short. The child's name was Lily. She was 2 years old. In one message, Michelle had sent Dan a photo with the caption her first day of preschool, and there was a little girl, dark hair, green eyes, unmistakably Dan's coloring, standing in front of a small brick building with a backpack almost as big as she was, grinning a gap-toothed grin at the camera. I looked at that photo for a long time. She had his eyes, exactly his eyes. I scrolled further. I read things I cannot unread. Conversations about visits, the gym mornings that conveniently lined up with days Dan had supposedly been working from home. Flights booked on his personal credit card, which I never monitored because we'd always operated with a degree of financial independence and trust. Hotel points he'd been accumulating. And woven through all of it, a domestic intimacy that made my stomach turn. Conversations about Lily's daycare, about Michelle's apartment lease, about what color to paint the nursery before Lily was born. Before Lily was born, he had known about this child before she existed. He had been present for this pregnancy in some form, in some capacity, while he was coming home to me and sleeping in our bed and telling me he loved me and sitting across from me at dinner asking me about my students and my day. I don't know how long I sat there. The light in the kitchen changed. It was still afternoon when I picked up the phone, and at some point I registered that it had gotten dark outside. The soup had gone cold. The house was completely quiet. I put his phone down. I picked it back up. I went to his photos. This was the part I hadn't anticipated. The messages were devastating, but the photos were something else entirely. Because a text message, no matter how intimate, is still words on a screen. Photos are real. Photos are proof that moments actually happened in 3-dimensional space, that real human bodies were in a real room together, that the life you're looking at was being lived in parallel to yours. There were hundreds of photos. Lily at what must have been her first birthday, a smear of frosting on her nose. Dan crouched beside her chair, grinning that grin of his. Dan and Michelle at what looked like a backyard barbecue, casual and comfortable, her leaning against him. Lily asleep on Dan's chest on a couch in an apartment I'd never seen. Family photos. Real family photos. A whole album of moments from a life he'd built 1,800 miles away from mine. And then, near the end of the camera roll, clearly taken recently, a photo of Lily and Dan sitting on what looked like a park bench. And Lily was pointing at something off camera, and Dan was laughing, full and real, and written across the bottom in the kind of font someone uses when they print a photo to frame it. My daddy and me, October 2024. My daddy. I put the phone face down on the table, and then I started to cry. Not the kind of crying you do at sad movies, or when you're frustrated, or when you're grieving something small. This was a different kind entirely. It came from somewhere I didn't know existed in me, some deep animal place, and it wasn't pretty or quiet or cinematic. It was ugly. It shook my whole body. I sat at my own kitchen table in the dark, and I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, until my face was swollen, and my throat hurt, and my chest felt like something inside it had been physically broken. I cried for myself, for 17 years of believing something that wasn't true. I cried for the 2 pregnancies we'd lost together, or what I thought was together. I had leaned on this man in the worst moments of my life, and he had been lying to me every single day of it. I cried for Lily, that little girl with his green eyes. She hadn't asked for any of this, and somewhere deep in the ugliest part of that grief, I cried because I had not known, because I had been so completely and totally deceived by someone I had handed my entire life to, and I had never, not once, genuinely suspected that the reality I was living was false. That humiliation is its own specific kind of pain. The feeling of being the last person to know. The feeling that your own life was a stage set, and you were the only one who didn't have the script. I cried for a long time, and then I stopped, not because I felt better, but because something settled into place inside me, a cold, quiet thing, and I realized that I needed to think clearly. He was going to be home in less than 2 hours. I washed my face. I put the soup away. I sat back down at the table with a glass of water, and I thought about what I was going to do with the next 2 hours and the next 2 days and the rest of my life. Part of me, the part that was still in shock, still submerged, wanted to pretend I hadn't seen it. Wanted to put the phone back on the counter exactly where he'd left it and sit through dinner and say nothing and go to bed and pull the blanket over my head and just disappear into the life I'd had this morning before I'd looked. That part of me was very loud. The other part was quiet and certain. I picked up my own phone. I called my sister, Diane, who lives 40 minutes away and who has always been the person I call when the world falls apart. She answered on the second ring, and I said very calmly, "I need you to come over right now." She heard something in my voice that words weren't carrying. She said, "I'm leaving right now." She didn't ask questions. That's Diane. While I waited for her, I did something I'm not proud of and simultaneously completely at peace with. I took photographs. I photographed the messages. I photographed the photos. I photographed the contact card for M, showing a Charlotte number. I photographed enough that if anyone ever looked me in the eye and told me I had imagined this or misunderstood it, I would have irrefutable, unambiguous evidence that I had not. Then I put his phone back on the counter exactly where he'd left it. Diane arrived before Dan did. I opened the front door and she took one look at my face, even freshly washed. I must have looked like something hollowed out, and she said, "Oh, Claire." And she came inside and I showed her the photos I'd taken of the screen, and I watched her read them the same way I had, that same slow submersion happening across her features. And when she looked up at me, her eyes were full. How long, she said. 3 years, I said. At least. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, what do you want to do? That question, that specific question. I loved her for asking it that way. Not what are you going to do, but what do you want to do, because it put the power exactly where it belonged, with me. I don't know yet, I said, but he'll be home in an hour, and I need to decide if I'm going to say something tonight or wait. She sat with me at the kitchen table and we talked it through. She was not the kind of sister who tells you what to do. She was the kind who helps you figure out what you already know. And what I already knew, sitting there in my dark kitchen, was that I could not sit across from Dan at dinner and pretend. I am not built that way. I never have been. I am a terrible liar and an even worse actress. I was going to say something. I just needed to decide what. Dan came home at 7:15. He came through the back door the way he always did, keys on the hook, shoes off in the mudroom, the small familiar sounds of his arrival that I had heard thousands of times, and that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. He came into the kitchen and saw Diane sitting at the table and did a small double take of surprise. Hey, he said, didn't know you were coming over. Last minute thing, Diane said. Her voice was perfectly even. I was grateful for her. He looked at me then, and I wonder if some part of him saw it in my face, some flicker of wrong that his nervous system recognized before his conscious mind caught up, because he paused, just for a half second, the smallest hesitation. You okay? He said to me. I looked at my husband, at this man I'd built everything with, at the face I'd woken up next to for 17 years. We need to talk, I said. Diane's going to stay. The color drained out of his face so fast it was almost physical. I watched it happen, and in that moment I knew two things simultaneously, that he knew exactly what this was about, and that he had lived in terror of this moment for a very long time. He sat down. I thought I might yell. I thought there might be screaming, plates thrown, voices raised, the dramatic kind of confrontation you see in movies. But that's not what happened. What happened was quiet and brutal and honest, and in some ways far worse than any screaming could have been. I put my phone on the table between us with the screenshots visible. Who is Michelle? I said. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. He opened his mouth and closed it. The silence stretched out long enough to fill the whole room. Claire, he started. Who is Lily? I said. He pressed his hand over his eyes. He made a sound, not a word, just a sound, that I can only describe as the sound of a person who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has just finally, catastrophically, put it down. She's mine, he said, quiet, destroyed. She's my daughter. I had known that. I had known it from the green eyes in the photograph. But hearing him say it was different. Hearing him say it made it real in a way it hadn't been before, and I felt the ground shift under me even though I was sitting still. How long? I said. 3 years. Has it been going on for 3 years? Or has she existed for 2 years inside of something that's been going on longer? He looked up at me then. He owed me the honesty of eye contact, and somewhere in whatever remained of his sense of decency, he understood that. He held my gaze. I met Michelle 4 years ago, he said, at a conference in Charlotte. 4 years, I did the quiet math. 4 years ago, I had been 39. We'd been married for 13 years. The year his father died and I had taken 2 weeks off work to be there for him. The year I made him soup when he got pneumonia and sat on the bathroom floor with him at 2 in the morning because he was sick and miserable. That year, that was the year he met Michelle. Did you love her? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know. That's not an answer. I know, he said. I know it isn't. Does she know about me? He nodded just once, small. Does she know your wife's name? Yes. Does she know that I exist and she knows and you've been doing this for 4 years and you never, my voice broke. Just once. I pulled it back. You never thought I deserved to know. He started to cry then. Dan, who I had seen cry 3 times in 17 years at his father's funeral, when we lost the second pregnancy, when our dog died, was sitting at our kitchen table with tears running down his face. There is nothing I can say, he said. There's no explanation that makes this okay, I know that, but I want one anyway, I said. He talked for a long time. He told me about Charlotte, about meeting Michelle, about how it had started as one night, and he told himself it was nothing, it was over, and then he'd gone back and it wasn't over. He told me how it had grown into something he didn't know how to name or stop. He told me about finding out Michelle was pregnant, about the months of panic and what he described as the worst year of his life, somehow managing to be present for the birth of his child while sleeping in my bed and eating my cooking and telling me he loved me. He told me he'd thought about telling me 100 times. He told me he didn't know why he hadn't. He said things like I didn't want to hurt you and I didn't know how to get out and I was a coward and all of it was true and none of it was enough. None of it was anywhere close to enough. Diane sat at the end of the table the whole time and said nothing. She was just there, a witness, an anchor. When Dan finished talking, the kitchen was very quiet. I want you to leave tonight, I said. He nodded. I want you to call a hotel and go there, and I want you to give me time to figure out what I need. He nodded again. And Dan, I waited until he was looking at me. I need you to know that I am not angry that that little girl exists. Lily has done nothing wrong. Whatever happens between us, whatever I decide, I need you to know that she doesn't deserve to carry any of this. He broke down completely then. Full, silent, gasping sobs. And I sat there and watched it, and I did not reach over and touch him the way I would have instinctively done with any human pain I witnessed, because some part of me understood that I had spent 4 years instinctively comforting the person who was causing me harm, and that was over. He packed a bag. He left. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I say that having buried a parent, having lost 2 pregnancies, having lived through things I thought at the time were unsurvivable. This was harder, because grief for something you've lost to death is clean, in its way terrible and bottomless, but clean. Grief for something you've lost to deception is complicated and layered and full of sharp edges. You're not just mourning the loss, you're mourning the false version of what you had. You're revising 17 years of memory in real time, running every moment through a new filter, asking yourself, did he mean this? Was this real? Was any of it real? That question, was any of it real, is the one that nearly undid me. I saw a therapist. Her name is Dr. Anita Walsh, and she is one of the finest human beings I have ever encountered. She helped me understand something in our very first session that I needed desperately to hear. That the goodness in my marriage, the real moments of love and partnership and genuine connection, was not made false by the deception layered over it. Both things could be true. He could have genuinely loved me in the ways he demonstrated over the years, and he could have also done something profoundly, inexcusably wrong. The marriage could have been real, and the betrayal could have been real. The human heart is not always logical. That doesn't excuse anything, but it helped me stop trying to retroactively erase everything in order to make sense of the lie. I talked to a lawyer. I began the process. I told my parents. That was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had, watching my mother's face move through shock and then fury and then a broken, helpless grief. She kept saying, "Not Dan, not Daniel," because she had loved him too. A lot of people had loved him. He was genuinely lovable. That was in many ways the cruelest part. I told my close friends, the ones who needed to know. Each time felt like reopening a wound, but each time I also felt something that surprised me, a steadying. Every person I told who sat with me in it, who didn't flinch or offer meaningless platitudes, who just stayed present, each one of them became a kind of pillar. I learned in those months that I was more loved than I had known, that I had built without fully realizing it, a community of people who would show up for me. That mattered more than I can say. Dan and I had several more conversations over those weeks. I won't pretend they were all like the first one, calm and cold and controlled. Some were not. There was one night about 3 weeks in when he called and I picked up, and something he said unlocked a fury in me I hadn't known I was still holding, and I said things that were not calm or controlled, things that were blunt and hot and pointed. I'm not sorry for that conversation. I think I needed it. We talked about the practical realities, the house I wanted to stay. He agreed. We talked about finances, about how to divide what we'd built together. We talked carefully and painfully about Lily. This is the part that complicated everything in whys I hadn't expected. Lily was real. Lily was 2 years old. Lily was innocent. And Lily was, in some strange and complicated way, a part of the world now because of my husband, which made her some fractional, peripheral part of my story, whether I wanted her to be or not. I did not resent that child. I had meant what I said to Dan at the kitchen table. But navigating a divorce that included the fact of an outside child, the legal implications, the emotional weight of it, the knowledge that he would be building a family in Charlotte while I rebuilt my life in Columbus, required a kind of interior spaciousness I had to work very hard to find. I found it eventually, imperfectly, but I found it. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that Tuesday in October. I kept the house. I kept the crooked kitchen cabinet that Dan never fixed, and I fixed it myself one Saturday afternoon with a screwdriver and 15 minutes of YouTube tutorial. And I cried a little while I did it, and then felt something I can only describe as fiercely, quietly triumphant. I went back to teaching in January, and standing in front of a room full of 12-year-olds who wanted to know how photosynthesis worked was, unexpectedly, one of the most healing things in the world. Children are not interested in your interior devastation. They want to know things. They want to be taught. They look at you with eyes open, wondering faces, and they need you to show up. And so you show up. And in the showing up, you start to remember that you are still capable of being useful and present and fully alive. I hiked every weekend through that first winter, even when it was cold enough that I had to layer up and my breath came in clouds. Sometimes Diane came with me. Sometimes I went alone. There is something about moving through a landscape under your own power, putting one foot in front of the other on actual ground, feeling the cold air and the ache in your muscles that cuts through psychological pain in a way nothing else does. My body reminded me it was still working, still strong, still mine. I started baking more. Elaborate, complicated things, sourdough with long ferments, croissants with 3 hours of laminating dough, things that required patience and precision and your full attention. My friends were well fed that winter. I think I fed everyone I knew. There is something primal and comforting about feeding people, about making something from nothing with your hands. I want to say something about anger because people ask me about it. They want to know if I'm still angry. They expect the answer to be yes, a blazing, ongoing yes, and they're sometimes surprised when I tell them the truth. The anger burned hot and then it burned through, and what's on the other side of it is not forgiveness exactly. I haven't arrived at forgiveness yet, and I'm not sure I will, but something closer to indifference. The specific texture of my life no longer involves Dan as a central character. He has become a peripheral figure in a story that is now primarily about me. That is its own kind of freedom. What I am still working through, what I suspect will take longer than a year and perhaps longer than I can currently imagine, is the trust. Not trust in Dan specifically, but the more general, foundational trust in my own perception of reality. The voice that still sometimes asks, "But how would you know? You didn't know before." The slight flinch when someone I care about is on their phone. The moments of hypervigilance that catch me off guard in ordinary situations. Dr. Walsh says this is normal. She says the nervous system that was deceived doesn't immediately unlearn its caution, and the goal isn't to get back to the total unguarded openness I had before. That openness was beautiful, but it wasn't wisdom. But to build a new kind of trust that has eyes in it. Trust that is awake. Trust that asks questions without shame. Trust that knows it can survive being wrong because it has survived it before and it is still here. I am still here. There is something I want to tell you, whoever you are listening to this. I spent a long time after everything happened wondering what I had done wrong, what I had missed, what I should have caught, how I had been so thoroughly fooled. I picked myself apart looking for the flaw, the gap, the thing in me that had made me susceptible to this. And here is what I eventually understood, after enough therapy and enough walks in the cold and enough late nights with Diane and enough honest conversations with myself. I had done nothing wrong by trusting him. Trust is not naivety. Trust is not stupidity. Trust is what you extend to someone when they have spent years demonstrating that they deserve it. And Dan had done exactly that, had worked deliberately and consistently to maintain the appearance of a trustworthy life. And I had responded to the evidence available to me. I was not foolish. I was deceived. Those are entire. Why different things? The failure was his. The lie was his. The constructed double life, the hidden phone, the Charlotte apartment, the child he let grow up knowing his face but not his whole truth, that was all his. I did not cause that. I could not have prevented it without his willingness to have been the kind of person who wouldn't do it in the first place. And no amount of vigilance or suspicion suspicion on my part would have changed what he was. What I carry forward is not the blame I tried to assign myself. What I carry forward is this: the understanding that I am resilient in ways I didn't know before. That I can have my entire constructed reality destroyed on a Tuesday in October and still get up on Wednesday and fix the soup and call my sister and ask a hard question and survive the answer. That I can grieve fully and honestly and come out the other side not diminished but strangely, unexpectedly enlarged, more complex, more compassionate, more awake than I was when I had everything. The woman who stands in her kitchen now, alone, making bread on Sunday mornings is not the same woman who stood there stirring soup in October. She knows more, she has lost more, she has survived more, and she is, in ways that are hard to explain but completely real, more herself than she has ever been. Last month I went on a hike alone in a state park about an hour from Columbus. It was early spring, that particular shade of early spring when everything is just beginning and the air smells like soil and the trees have that faint green haze of new leaves. I stopped at the top of a ridge and looked out over the valley below, and I just stood there, not thinking about Dan, not thinking about Lily or Michelle or Charlotte or the soup or the phone on the counter, just standing there in the cold, clear air, breathing. And I thought, I am 43 years old. I have most of my life still in front of me. I have a job I love and a sister who shows up in a kitchen with a fixed cabinet door and a list of constellations I can name by heart and all of the ordinary, extraordinary days still to come. I thought I was never supposed to see those photos, but I saw them, and now I know everything. And knowing everything, even when it costs everything, is always, always better than the comfortable, beautiful, carefully constructed lie. I turned around. I walked back down the mountain. I went home.